Hey, welcome to Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast. We are beyond excited to celebrate the 4th anniversary of the Hangar Z Podcast with a truly powerful 2-part series. This milestone wouldn't be complete without bringing you 2 exceptional guests, James Hatch and Alan Mack. James Hatch, a retired Navy SEAL, best-selling author of the book Touching the Dragon, founder of Spike's Canine Fund, and recent Yale grad, joins us to share his incredible journey. From daring missions to the creation of a nonprofit that supports working dogs, James' story is one of resilience, dedication, and unwavering courage. Alan Mack, a retired Chief Warrant Officer 5 in the U.S. Army, and author of Razor 03, A Night Stalker's Wars, brings his wealth of experience in aviation to the conversation. Alan's tales from the cockpit, leadership insights, and exercises and experiences in some of the most intense combat scenarios offer a captivating glimpse into the life of a true aviation hero. In this special anniversary episode, we dive deep into the important topics of mental health and leadership. We discuss the importance of service and sacrifice and explore the lessons learned from their remarkable experiences. James and Alan's stories of bravery and perseverance are sure to inspire and motivate. Join us as we celebrate 4 years of the Hangar Z Podcast, reflecting on the past while looking forward to the future. This episode's packed with powerful stories, valuable insights, and a few surprises you won't want to miss. Thank you to our sponsors, CNC Technologies, Metro Aviation, and Shotover. This episode of the Hangar Z Podcast contains heavy content that includes discussions of mental health challenges, combat experiences, and other sensitive topics. Additionally, there is explicit language throughout the episode. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z Podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, John Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Shanley.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like you're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, through the shotgun, through something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
Good advising code 4 on the stop.
Hey, welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast. I'm your host, John Gray. This is a super special episode of the Hangar Z Podcast, celebrating our 4th year of podcasting. Gosh, when this thing started in 2020, never did I envision a 4-year anniversary episode with 2 American heroes, and then having had Jack Shanley with us and Jeff Ratkovich was furthest thing from my mind. I think I was just trying to pin my mom down to committing to listening at that point, and and look where we are. This is absolutely amazing. So thank you everybody for joining. There's a group of us here. Jack, thanks for joining. How are you doing?
Great. Happy anniversary. This is great. You've done an amazing thing here, John. And I mean, just look at all the different guests you've had from a wide variety of backgrounds and the response that we all hear after podcasts. You're doing great things. Congratulations and happy anniversary.
Well, it's definitely a team that we've assembled. I don't think any one person's made this happen. It's been a combination of all the guests we've had and then all the expertise that you guys bring. So on that, Jeff, welcome.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Sorry for the being absent a lot, but been busy with work and everything else. But yeah, happy anniversary, buddy. It's I can't believe it's been 4 years. Like you said, right. I thought this was just a little hobby, and it's really taken off. And here we are talking to Al Mack and Jimmy. This is going to be a good discussion, I think.
Yeah,
really good discussion.
The early days, we'd be flying and we'd come home from our day job, and then we'd hop on at night, and our wives would make fun of us, like 2 little nerds talking about flying helicopters. And while I'm still a little nerd talking about helicopters, it's become a thing. And to have a conversation with all of you today is truly an honor. Jimmy, I want to welcome you to the podcast again. You were part of episode 100 and 101, and since then, you've graduated from Yale. So congratulations and welcome back.
Congratulations,
Thanks,
Jimmy.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Great accomplishment.
I'm still trying to wonder if they just felt sorry for me. I don't know. But apparently that's not a thing here. They don't feel sorry for you. Honestly, man, it's not unlike a special military unit here. It really isn't. I mean, the vetting process is significant. And then once you're here, there's resources, but there's also expectations. And it's a really interesting, beautiful place. I love it. And now they've offered me a job. But John, man, good job with this thing. Like, you're self-effacing, of course, but it takes a lot of trial and error to find out what microphones work and how to get, guys, idiots like me with 6 thumbs, like you're playing your role down, man. And this is a very good thing. We lack, one could say, these types of just good, straightforward conversations in our, cultural dialogue. And so this is something that, guys like me or anybody else really can tune into and just kind of listen to a couple of folks who might have something to say that's worthwhile. And I think it takes a lot more time than you're letting on. But I appreciate it.
I appreciate that. Talk about time. You and Al both have spent a significant amount of time writing, and the books that both of you have written have changed people's lives in a ton of positive ways. And it shed light for the folks who've never had the opportunity to deploy and weren't a part of that world to understand what it's like. So I commend you guys and thank you for that. And, having you two on here to talk about your life experiences is really important. We think about the 4th year anniversary, like what I want to talk about. Something that's really important is something that comes to mind. That's mental health. All of us in this recording have spent a significant amount of time with our, I'll call them first responder families in different ways. But we've all lived through those different experiences and I think have a lot to say and a lot of wisdom when it comes to the things we're going to talk about today, particularly Jimmy and Al. What you guys write about in your books sheds a lot of light on those topics. So I'm very excited to talk about that. Today's going to be a little different of a conversation. A lot of times we have super light-hearted conversations and joke a lot. We will joke and it'll be fun, but this is going to be, a very impactful conversation, I think, based on our previous conversations and the need for this conversation to continue. So before we get into that, Al, thank you again for joining us. It's an honor.
It's my pleasure.
You've been on a podcast tour. I've seen you on quite a few. So thank you for coming back to us.
Yeah, I got a couple more that haven't come out yet. That,
nice.
I'm waiting on.
Oh, great.
Every one that comes out, I take the opportunity to listen to. And so my oldest boy, he's 14 now. He's listened to the podcast with you, and he's in the process of finishing your book. Yeah. So you guys are both reaching a wide audience of people that probably when you wrote your books and talk about this stuff, you didn't really realize how impactful and how wide that audience was going to be.
Yeah. It's surprising. Obviously the topic here is we're going to touch on is, mental health and emotions and things. And it turns out that a lot of the emails that I get from the book are referring to the, troubles I had at home with my wife and her addiction and the emotional impact that deployments had on me, and less, I thought it would be more people, excited about the helicopter stuff and dropping bombs and, that kind of stuff. And it was more about the emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a different, difficult environment that we find ourselves in doing this kind of work. And I think everyone's impacted in so many different ways. So the light you guys shed on these topics is so impactful. For the folks who haven't had the opportunity to read either of the 2 books, Touching the Dragon, I highly recommend you guys do that. Razor 03 was such a good book. Both books really touch on a lot of the emotional impact that deployments bring out.
Our prop desk that we hired a prop guy, and he kindly jumped in today to provide this for our YouTube watchers. You're seeing Razor 03 and Touching the Dragon. Thank you to our prop guy, Joey. Thanks, Joey.
Yeah, thank you.
But yeah, awesome books and super impactful. So before we hop into the conversation, I'd really like to go and preview your guys' career and your life. I know a lot of folks have listened to the episodes that you guys have been on. But Jimmy, if we could start with you, if you can just give the folks kind of a 10,000 foot view of who you are as a person and what you did throughout your career and what you're doing now, that'd be awesome.
Okay. Quickly, I joined the service the day I turned 17, and I was hell-bent on being a Green Beret. I grew up I was born in the 60s and grew up in the 70s, and John Wayne and everybody was a Green Beret that I loved, and I wanted to be that. So I joined the Army had this program where you could go between your junior and senior of high school, you could go to boot camp. And in my case, I was lucky. I got to go to jump school too at Fort Benning at the time. And I don't even know what Fort Benning's called these days, but I'm probably not remembering it. Do you know what it is, Alan?
No.
Okay. And anyway, it's not called Fort Benning anymore, but it's in Georgia. And while I was there, I was the guidon bear, and carrying the flag in front. And I was a really good runner. I grew up in Utah at about 5,500 feet, so I could run. And the company commander was a ranger, which to me was basically, he was a deity. And I was a young guy, and he would just talk to me like a human. And one day we were running, he goes, Hatch, sometimes there's these guys that come through here that are from the Navy. And I'm like, Navy? And he said, well, he's like, they're a little bit different. And he goes, and you're kind of like, and I was like, okay. So I went home, and we didn't have the internet, and we had this thing called an encyclopedia, and I click it open, and I'm like, there's a picture of Navy SEALers, a dude standing on a beach with a machine gun. I'm like, done. So I switched over. I found a recruiter, God bless him, who did the paperwork to get me switched over. I went to Navy boot camp again. Then I tried out for the SEAL world, and I quit about 10 minutes into Hell Week, which at the time was the 5th week, and now I think it's the 4th week. So the Navy saw fit to send me out to the regular Navy to build some character. They sent me to a ship, and a ship is like jail, except you can drown. I don't know why the fuck anybody goes on a cruise. I don't get it, man. Like, that thing is a petri dish. You're gonna get sick. Somebody is gonna fall overboard and never be seen again. Like, I don't know. Anyway, I went to the ship. I hated it, but I had to do something I didn't want to do for almost 4 years, and I worked hard and went back to SEAL training, made it through. I went to SEAL Team 8, and then tried out, went to Dev Group, spent some time there, left, went to the Navy parachute team, got in a pretty good accident, spent a week in a coma, broke my back, blah, blah, blah. Head injury. And then
I like how you said blah, blah, blah. Like,
blah,
it's not a big
blah,
deal. I remember from our first conversation, it's super impactful, literally and figuratively, right? And how that changed your career.
Yeah, for sure. So then I went to Yuma as a free fall instructor, worked a lot with the Army Special Operations world, which was good. And then in 2004, I went back to my unit and started deploying after that. And I think I was on the bird that Chief Mack was flying on that, the Red Wings thing, which was funny because I remember that. It was a tough time, clearly, for everybody. And I was just a lowly shooter. But I was on that rope. I had just I really wanted to be a dog guy, and I was playing with one of our work dogs, and the dog bit me, tore my hand up, and kind of had some stitches and shit in there. So, and I was a saw gunner. So I get on the rope, and dude, that was a lot longer. That was about a 4-mile rope. But dude, when I got on that thing, I had a hard time gripping. And it was like I shifted gears on the way. I hit like a bag of smashed assholes, man. And I was like, I'm okay. And then we got to walk to that ridge line where we found the remains of the helo with the Rangers, and those kids, those kids make all ass. So, and after that, I deployed and worked until I got hurt in 2009. Got out and really struggled after I got hurt. Spent some time in, mental health facilities. Started a nonprofit called Spike's Canine Fund, which takes care of working dogs. Dogs saved my life a bunch in combat, and I want to help. So I don't do much with it anymore. I founded it, and turns out the rest of the world isn't really into Navy SEAL leadership like they think they are, and I'm not value added in that environment anymore. It's a little too. I just don't have the patience, to coddle people. And I'm not anybody, no one from my staff needed that. But the world of helping dogs, you have to go through humans, and those humans control the dogs. So there's a lot there that I was not successful with, and it was really difficult for me. So at any rate, I turned my attention to my studies here at Yale, and just graduated. And now they've asked me to teach a course, and I'm writing another book.
Yeah. You talked about leading people. You're leading the whole free world now, both of you, through your writings, and you chuckle, but it's true. There's so many impactful stories that the both of you have shared through your books, and people have been impacted as a result. I just commend you guys for that, and that's why we want to have you on. There's two things I want to touch on that you just brought up. One, you talked about flying with Al. So when you guys look in reverse, how many missions do you think you guys flew together unknowingly?
No telling, really. As a matter of fact, I was trying to remember when we'd met, because I knew we had, and I think it may have been at JBAD, it could have been at Bagram. It probably was at JBAD during the Red Wings, because I remember you talking about the dog biting you, and when I was reading your book, I was like, oh wait, I was present at that. I did that. I was, and so it was kind of, it's a small world, and I used to fly, everybody, when it came to, whether it was the Delta guys or the DevGru or the SF guys or Rangers and that kind of stuff. And it was always sometimes it was fun and sometimes it was frustrating because, I might fly, the Rangers to a target in Afghanistan, and 2 weeks later fly the Delta guys to the same target, different bad guy, same building. And I'd say, hey, just so you know, I was here 2 weeks ago and there was hip deep snow, with the Rangers. They walked in and and the Delta guys said, no, we're going right to the X. So we're going to run right outside the building. I said, I really would reconsider that if I were you. You're going to get stuck on the snow. And they're like, hey, we got the ground plan, you got the airplane. Shut up, right? All right, fine. I put them in. They ran off the ramp and they were stuck, up to their hips in snow. And I left, and there was bullets flying everywhere. And when we came to the AAR, the after action review, the troop commander said, Al, I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. Next time I will, right? Because he'd never worked with me before, which is always the case, right? You end up working with somebody new. It's like, the team leaders, the troop chiefs, they stick around. The troop commanders tend to roll through a little bit more often, right? And they're the ones that are the most difficult to deal with, just because they have to relearn or learn. But, yeah. So, we probably were together, quite a bit. I was trying to remember, Jimmy, did you end up in silver at all? Or were you always in red?
I was always in red. And
okay.
Were you out at Al Assad at all? Did you ever fly out of there?
Yeah, I was at Al Assad.
Okay. So,
yeah, and we did, yeah. And that was my first deployment in Iraq, was Al Assad. And then after that it was Balad,
Yep.
But it's always, I tried thinking about the like the Bergdahl missions, and like there's a behind me here, you see this brown matted Chinook drawing, and up in the top you can't see it from there, but it says I'm gonna saute this bitch, and that comes from a Bergdahl mission where there was no place to land, and the whole flight I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do, and as I round the corner I see that there is nowhere to land, and I say I have the controls, set the brakes, you guys ever hear of saute? And the door gunner says, hey, wait, were they intentionally crashed in Vietnam to rescue those POWs? And I said, you got the point. Hang on. And we went in, and I was able to, get it on the ground. But those missions, they tend to, and of course, it's like a fish story. When you go back to the regiment, they're all, they've added things to that story that didn't happen. Like he rolled inverted and dropped me. I was like, no, it just was a dusty, nasty LZ. But so it's hard to tell, how often we've actually been together. And the reason I asked if you were with Silver is we were on a mission where we had the guys from JBAD came down. We were in Sharana, and we were hitting this big target, and we had to fast rope everybody in up in the mountains. And the dog actually went after a guy with a suicide vest, and he clacked it off, but it low ordered, and the dog ended up getting Casevac and survived. But the suicide guy did his job.
I remember that. Yeah. I remember that.
Jimmy, you talked about Spikes briefly, and I love that organization, what that organization's doing. Huge benefit to law enforcement. What you guys are doing, raising money for training, raising money for ballistic vests for the dogs and these agencies that can't afford that. We were just in Nashville visiting Nashville Metro, and came across one of their handlers, and they had a Spikes vest on, which is really cool. It was kind of a full circle thing. I think we sent that to you when we were there, but neat what you're doing. You talked about how dogs saved your life, and I think dogs they're such wonderful animals for a million reasons. I think about the emotional impact that they have in our lives. They're better than most people. They're around all the time and know when things are good, know when things are bad, and know when to be by your side and when not. That leads into the story of your injury. Can you kind of give us a synopsis of what happened with your injury and go from there?
Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
Yeah, so it was 2009. I was actually in Bagram one night, and it's a year ago tomorrow.
Cool.
So,
wow.
I'm sorry, not a year ago.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's the anniversary.
Anniversary.
Yeah.
I needed whiskey before this, and now I'm starting to hit. At any rate, I was standing there, and I was a team leader, and one of the intel guys walked up, and he handed some papers and goes, "Man, this is messed up." And so I looked at it, and it was kind of a report on the kid walking off, and then it was his ISOPREP card, and I could tell by reading his ISOPREP card that he definitely wasn't. He seemed a little bit confused, even in his ISOPREP card, and I don't know, man. Something hit me about it a little bit off. But I looked at the guy next to me and said, "Hey, man, somebody's going to get killed or hurt trying to get this stupid fucking kid." Of course, there I was about a week later. So you talked about landing at the X, and that was a really big deal, something I struggled with. We canceled the mission that night, and we were with Dave Ritchie. And he, it was a full moon, and, not the type of we wanted to go out and do what we were getting ready to do. And then some intel came across, and the guys that came across were they were talking about things they'd been doing to Bergdahl, and it was pretty nasty, obviously. So we just kind of agreed that we'd go, and we'd take it, which is an opportunity, and we didn't know what we were going to get, obviously. Then there was a discussion, so we did the planning very quickly, and we didn't have super good imagery, but we had some, and there was a little bit of an argument about going to the X or landing a distance off and then patrolling in, and I was for the X part. And the reason I was is because of the hostage rescue thing, and I felt as if because the bottom line is, if you've never been to Afghanistan, you can hear a helicopter 30 miles away. It's quiet there like it isn't anywhere else in the world. It is quiet. There's no traffic. There's no generators. There's no power. There's no running water. I mean, it is quiet. But they have a really good alert network. And I thought, man, by the time we walk in there, it'll, they'll be gone. So, which was great because I was laying in the hospital, a month later or so. One of the senior officers came in I wonder who called that go to the X. I'm like, actually, I was one of them. So, but we went to the X, and we thought we were going to the Y. And it turned out the Y was the X. And the dudes started, they were flight of 2, and they lit us up pretty good. And we got off. My bird was the farthest from the actual contact. We're probably 100 meters, not even that, 50 meters away. And we got held up because you could see the tracers kind of going by the back of the helicopter. We're just hunkered down. The helicopter took off. The guys closest to the contact took care of it. And we just broke up and started maneuvering. And it was chaos, man. There were people running all over the place, and you could hear people shooting, and you could see tracers. And it was really difficult to figure out who's who in the zoo unless you got close, just because of the night vision and the way the full moon kind of washes that stuff out. So I split my crew in half, took myself, another shooter, a dog guy, and the dog. And it was the dog's first, I think, man, it was one of his first gunfights. And I wanted him to be with me, because I wanted to make sure that he was okay, which turns out that didn't work out. But I wanted to be able to help kind of set the standards for the dog, in these environments, because it was the handler. He was pretty new as well. And so we moved, got into a little bit of a skirmish, and then I saw the gunship pointed out some dudes that were moving, carrying heavy stuff, probably 400 meters away. It's funny, man. I can't remember. I'm serious. I've had some good head injuries, but I remember where the wind was coming from. We landed south and north, and the wind was coming out of the east. So I lined the dog up basically, and I'd done this before. We started moving because the guys were moving and they ducked down. We couldn't see him. It was June. And so they had just harvested the poppy, 3 weeks before. So the ground we were on was a poppy field. And the poppy stalks were dried out from being in the sun all day. And it was like walking on a bags of Lay's potato chips. There was no,
no silence.
It was not quiet. But the dog, in these environments, and I had done this before, the dog gives you, just a little bit of time. And generally speaking, the dog hits them before they have a chance to get any rounds off. But that night, it was not the case. We started moving towards them, and I just kept my eye on the dog. I couldn't see where the guys were. I just kept watching the dog. So I know his body language would tell us what we need to know. So it was myself and the other two guys, and the other shooter moved off and kind of got into an L. And as we got close, I saw the dog's body language change. It happened pretty quick, but we were probably 20 feet from the guys, and the dog ran up, and turned out it was a ditch. They were in a ditch. And the dog ran up the side of the ditch bank, and as he got to the top of it, dude hit him in the head twice with an AK, and the muzzle flash lit everything up enough that I could see I wasn't going to shoot an American. So I started filling him in, and his buddy panicked like they always do. And can I just give you a little aside here? This is funny. So Secretary Gates came to see me in the hospital, Defense Secretary Gates. Nice guy, super humble, quiet, unassuming. And before he left the hospital room, I'm all drugged up. I'm like, hey, listen, can you do me a favor? He's like, sure. Like, next time you're at a press conference and they start talking about the Taliban being these great warriors, will you tell them that's just not true? They're pussies. He's like, oh, I'll be sure to do that. At any rate, he shot me in the leg, and I don't remember, you don't hear the round that hits you, obviously. I remember getting hit in the leg, and just as I was putting my right leg down, I was screaming at the dog handler, yelling at him, get the dog back. Boom! I went down, and man, it was nasty, and blew the bone out of the back of my right leg, and my buddies covered open ground in a gunfight. One guy had to shoot people to get to me, and they put a tourniquet on me and called in the guys, TF-116. It's funny, man. I got up in front of is it 4th Battalion? Yeah. So they were doing their formal a few years ago, and they asked me to speak, and I was like, hell yeah. So I went. There were 3 or 4 guys in that place that were on that mission, and I got up in front of the whole unit that was in attendance. I'm like, listen, man, because you guys don't talk about what you do with your wives or your kids, just like, we didn't much either. And I was like, look, imagine the worst night of your life. You're across the world, bleeding to death, and you're laying there in the dirt, and you're going to die if somebody doesn't come get you. And you know in your heart, you have no doubt that those folks are going to come back and get you. And that sounds a little cheaper than it really is. Like, it's easy to say that, but like, seriously, it's not a platitude. Like, when you know that there was no doubt, I'm like, it doesn't matter. Those guys will come get you. And that's a significant thing. Yeah. I wish I was more eloquent. At any rate, guys came back, landed. I had the audacity to take my digital camera out and ask my buddy to shoot a picture of me, which he did. And turns out I ran into one of the guys a few years ago. He was one of the crew chiefs, Carl, big red-haired kid. And he said, yeah, last time I saw you, you were on the floor of my helicopter bleeding all over the place. I was like, oh, shit. Anyway, small world. Got back to the States, medevaced, and got back to the States and really struggled. Isolated myself, just couldn't be a tough guy anymore. That was my identity. Didn't realize that it was. Ended up, drinking, doing the drugs, all the things, and ended up in, suicidal situation. Local law enforcement was part of the reason why I help cops. In fact, I've done 3 talks here in New Haven where I get a badass professor from Yale, and we invite all the first responders and talk about stuff that'll help them out. I'm doing one next week on Sophocles, which is great. And I can talk it like the way I understand it. So I'm not a professor, but the guys will get me, they'll understand what I'm saying. After that, I talked about a little, the nonprofit stuff. But, the thing about Chief Mack's crew and working with, like he said, we worked in different countries, places that we don't talk about. The thing about those guys, I think, I think it was Toni Morrison. She said, people don't remember what you do for them, but they remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And I never, ever had a doubt or question and they called us their customer, it was just professional, get shit done on time, the pinnacle of it, honestly. And that attitude and that professionalism, you can't help but get better at the same thing. So it's like, you want to be a good runner? Go find people that run faster than you and run with them. And that's kind of what it was with regard to the commitment to the mission, the professionalism. And I think it's worth saying, and I don't know that a lot of people know this, but, what Chief Mack just talked about, all the people that the unit supported. Those guys deployed a lot more than everybody else, a lot more. And that's something that I think probably deserves a little bit of attention.
Yeah. You brought up something earlier. You talked about laying in the field and having this feeling in knowing that they're going to show up. Having read Al's book, having had you on the podcast before, Al, I recall the stories and the situations that you describe, you flying in zero visibility, under gunfire, under all these situations that you find yourself in. So I can see why, Jimmy, you had that feeling. You knew that he was going to be there because he was. And anybody that Al you worked with, I think, had that same mindset. You were going to be there if you could. So commend both of you. It's really cool to, on my screen, you're right next to each other, and you both have these different perspectives of the same thing. It's really neat to have you next to it, and I'm excited to hear this. Al, for you, can you kind of give us the 10,000-foot view of your career and some insight on some of the things that Jimmy talked about?
Sure. Except I'm all emotional now. Listen.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too, man.
All right. So I grew up in northern New England, New Hampshire, coastal New Hampshire, Portsmouth. I was born in the 60s. So same time frame as Jimmy, that 60s, 70s, no internet, no cell phones. In the summer when you're off from school, you're laying around going, I'm bored, and you find something to do. Yeah. And high school, I knew that if I went to college, which I was planning to do, I was just not going to study. I wasn't that kind of person at the time. I was too, I'd be looking out the window daydreaming. So I knew I wasn't going to do well in school. So a friend of mine went to the Army recruiter, popped in, one day and said, "Hey, Al, you ought to check out this Army thing." I'm like, Army? And I was interested. And, I ended up joining and ended up as an aircraft mechanic for a while. So I worked on Hueys, 58s, Cobras, and had a really good time with it. Did that for 9 years. Then went to flight school, became an Army Warrant Officer. And my first assignment was Savannah, Georgia. And I got there just as Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. So we ended up flying our aircraft up to Wilmington, put them on an old boat. I mean, this thing traveled at like 5 knots, to go across. It was like a 3 or 4 week transit. And we flew over. But in the meantime, the aircraft were gone. And luckily, the 160th, the 3rd Battalion 160th, was right next door. And, the Chinook community is kind of small, and everybody will have been to Korea, for example, right? And so everybody kind of knows everybody. And they were able to get a 160th Chinook to borrow for my progression. So I got to continue training. And that was what we call a warbird. It wasn't anything fancy. It was like a CH-47 Delta with steam gauges. And, it might have had like a onboard oxygen generating system and maybe some more radios, but it didn't have any of the special equipment we have nowadays. But it's just kind of ironic that I finished up my, flight training in a 160th Chinook, only to end up there for 17 years.
Yeah.
But, so there's Desert Storm or Desert Shield, Desert Storm. We come back, do a lot of flying. And I talk about in the book and in the last podcast how, we almost killed everybody at night, in the Army. We said we own the night, and we didn't. We kind of rented it. And so the Army made a big push when we got back was everything was done at night. And because I was one of the junior pilots, the old guys didn't want to do it. And they're like, screw that, send the young guys out, right? And so I got good at flying at night, me and, some of my peers. And then I went to Korea and I learned, to be what we call a no-fly line unit trainer, right? So you had to fly the border from memory. And, like the 6 months after I left, Bobby Hall flew across the border doing the same thing, right? And he got shot down, and that was a whole big international incident. And what's funny about it is, well, it's not funny, I guess, is I didn't realize the impact of that beforehand, and I would sneak up. So the no-fly line itself is part of what's called a buffer zone. And that buffer zone is no man's land. There's nothing in there but mines and, tunnels probably. And I would sneak across the line, the no-fly line, to look up a creek, where there was a couple of dams. And I'd say, you see that dam? If you see that dam, you're in the wrong valley. Turn around and get out, right? But we were doing that. I had no idea how stupid that was at the time. I was young W2. But, then I went and I taught at Fort Rucker, Alabama, which, once again, they changed the names. I think it's Novacell.
Yeah, Novacell.
Now, after the Medal of Honor recipient.
Oh, and I looked it up. Benning is Moore. Fort Moore.
Moore, that's right.
Oh, Hal Moore. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Fort
Yeah.
Moore.
It's insane. They changed all those names. But
Yeah.
they at least have a sign. Like when they change an exit sign on the highway, it says, old exit 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be, something like that.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned air medical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completions Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs, including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
I didn't really enjoy teaching at Fort Rucker. I liked my first couple of sets of students, and then they, I talk about the book having, guys that didn't want to be there, which made it not fun for me. And I had friends that were in the 160th, and they said, Al, you got to come with us, right? So I did. I didn't think I'd get accepted, but I did, and I spent 17 years there. A lot of deployments. I think 17 deployments for me. For Afghanistan and Iraq. And like Jimmy said, there was a couple other countries that you could throw in there. And then my wife, that whole time, she was having problems, with prescription opioid addiction. And I was dealing with that and deployments. And then she ended up dying of an overdose. And the regiment took really good care of me, offered me some jobs. And I ended up uncovering a statue called America's Response up at Ground Zero in Manhattan. And while I was up there, I thought, hey, the West Point Flight Detachment has a job. I think I like New York. And so I put in for it, and the general had to pick me over a couple of the guys. And I really enjoyed that assignment. And I was flying Lakotas, right? So, Chinooks were my aircraft, but the UH-72, or the mighty Lakota, as I like to call it, because it'll do everything you want, but just barely. And the Army decided to move me, and I just got remarried, and I said, screw that. I'm not going to take her out of New York. And I stayed here and now doing public service, as an emergency manager. And that's it.
And don't forget, Alan, the highlight of your career is Calvin Dockery's, what did you call it? His tryout for the 160th, right?
Oh, yeah.
Highlight of your career.
Yeah. So, it's funny. I put that in the new book, by the way.
Oh, good.
Because I'm doing, there's a chapter on, what it's like to assess, what it's like to get selected and then go through green platoon, then what it's like being a basic mission qualified pilot, fully mission qualified pilot, flight lead, air mission commander, medic. So we're talking about CASEVAC, and things like along those lines. And in the assessment thing, I talk about Cal because he is so hilarious when he tells the story because, I hate to use the words, but he's like, oh, Al's a legend. He's going to do my thing, right? And he's all excited and he's all very hyper, right? And I walk into the room and he's like, he's not there. He's up on the simulator, and I'm not used to that. So I came up there, and there are people today that know me that didn't know me back in the military, and they can't believe what an asshole I was, right? And I mean, a flight lead in the 160th is like how abused kids abuse their kids. Well, the flight lead program is like that. It's very, very intense. Yeah. So I walk into the simulator, I climb up the ladder, I get up there, and I'm like, "Are you Cal Dockery?" And he's like, "Yes, sir. You're out back. Oh, this is great." And I just ripped into him. I was like, "Get out of my seat." And the other guy, the instructor that had brought him up there, didn't defend him. I mean, pretty much what he did was go, "Hey, why don't you come on up? We'll wait for Al up there." He wasn't setting him up. He was just being nice, and I wasn't in the mood to be
having
nice.
any of that.
It's funny, the small world part. We've had Dave Ritchie and Cal Dockery together on the podcast, and they both know both of you. And it's just, and that night, Jimmy, that you mentioned Dave Ritchie, Cal Dockery was sitting right next to him, and Cal calls that night the night that Dave Ritchie tried to kill me, because of where you guys were, we're going to the X, but it is a small world, no doubt about it. I'm glad that you're going to talk about Cal a little bit more in the next book.
He's a great
guy.
Dave, I told you on the last podcast, I called him the hobo.
Oh yeah,
because he's always got like a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow even after he shaves. So he looks like one of those old hobos from like the 1930s. And what a great guy,
Well, they told me that there was a nickname for you too, Alan. That Cougar was one of them.
Oh yeah,
is that true?
Yeah, I never really used it. I've got some going away plaques. Yeah. That's because we were flying by. It was a dark night. And the rules of engagement had changed a little bit. This is probably in the 2004, 2005 timeframe. There's not a lot going on in Afghanistan because everything's happening in Iraq. So we're doing a lot of resupply missions, and we're flying to a place called Berrycout, which is way up in the mountains. And we got to fly by Asadabad. And when we do, it's zero illumination. We're blacked out, and there's a lot of suspended dust in the air. And 3 nights in a row, I have an overt laser pointed at my aircraft, like a pen laser, and it follows me until I turn a corner. And after the 3rd time, I said, "Okay, that's not a coincidence." And he went right at me, and there's no way he could see me. I mean, he could hear me, but there's no way he can see me. I said, "That is a rudimentary aiming point for a laser, RPGs, right?" Because they were doing volley fire. They'd shoot 4 or 5 RPGs at the same time and try to hit you. And so I had to go talk to the lawyers, and I had to get the rules of engagement that the laser was a hostile act and that I could kill it. And they finally agreed, but I brought DAPs with me, right? The armed Blackhawks. And they somebody had a set of goggles is what the deal is, right? So the guy with the goggles would point the laser, and all the other guys would just look over his shoulder and they could see the laser in the suspended dust. Well, here I am with armed Blackhawks behind me, and they didn't put the laser on me. The Lizard flight came through. That's the OGA guys, right, flying the Mi-17s. They got lit up with they didn't have any armed helicopter support, and they didn't get hit, but they had a pretty close call. But anyway, because I made a big stink about it, the opening scene in Maverick where a cougar gets, he loses his shit, right, and turns in his wings. Well, right about that time, I'm raising hell about this laser, and I changed jobs. So I went from the battalion standardization instructor pilot to the regiment. So I moved up. But the guy that came in behind me, his NCO would be like, Cougar lost his shit. He had to move out, beefs in, so that I've got all kinds of plaques. I never actually used it though.
That's funny.
Oh, that's great.
Offline, we were talking about something that I want to bring up right now. Jimmy talked about you didn't like to plug into the comms and the shit when you'd board. You tell us why and the story behind that.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually because I was, again, when I got shot up, I was a team leader. So I don't even know why the hell I was on the headset. Generally speaking, in the helicopter, the troop commander, the troop chief, or the troop sergeant major and troop commander would be on the headset. For some reason, I got it one night when we were in Iraq, and then these guys are like, "Oh yeah, are those rockets?" And I'm like, "What the fuck?" "Oh yeah, it looks like there's rockets." And like it's just like, "Hey, we're at the store. Those
big
Coors
deal.
Light or is that Miller Light?" And they're so chill, and I'm like, "F this." And I'm thinking, I don't want to even hear this shit. And I didn't want, and I don't think I ever put those things on again. No, but those guys are chill. But listen, man, you have to listen. I think it's important to really. I mean, you guys are all helo or aviators, so you guys are gonna. I don't know how to take this, but think about. I think about the, so the SEALs are known for the ability to operate in just about any kind of condition, and that's just a carcass. I'm carrying my carcass, or I'm swimming my carcass, or I'm jumping out of the back of an airplane with my carcass. But man, the places I've seen those guys put those fucking helicopters, and under the conditions that they were under, and obviously I'm not going to go into too much of the detail because people don't need to really understand their capabilities, but it's shocking. And I'm talking about things like ships and putting guys certain spots on those ships with all those antennas and fucking cables, and like that's one thing. And then head over to the mountains and fly in those. The Kunar Valley is no fucking joke. I mean, I don't care where you were born and raised, man. The terrain there is significant, and putting people like us in those places, I've been on those birds and Chinooks where I think it was Dave Ritchie actually put like one wheel on the side of a hill and we run out the back, that kind of thing. Like, I don't think that there's really ever been like just a flat out, these guys do some of the most crazy, wild shit on the regular that they're just like, okay, it's just another day at work. And I think, man, I don't know who could write that book because Alan's too fucking humble, but hopefully someday there'll be some light shed on all that, because that very small group of people supported very high speed people for a long time in very difficult circumstances with aviation platforms that were constantly improving or getting beat up. And man, it was an impressive undersold story.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I love the fact that these stories are starting to come out now, and through the books you guys have written. And part of the reason I asked you about that story was because I remember talking to Cal and Dave, and they're talking about their interactions on the ICS system about getting shot at. And just like you were saying, they talk about, oh, here we go, just no big deal. And I think Dave, one of those guys, did joke about leaving landing gear on the hills, one of those hillsides that like you described. But props to Al and your group of men and women that made those missions successful. No easy feat, whether you're on the ground like Jimmy or flying like Al. And I want to transition a little bit over to your books. So each one of your books talked about your different perspectives, and when it comes to mental health, you talked about these different perspectives, and Jimmy, you talked about your personal experience with your own mental health, and Al, you did that as well. But you focus on the family side of things, what you experienced with your wife. In our first interview, we didn't really get a chance to talk about that a whole lot. Can you talk about the impact that the constant deployments had on not just your life, but the lives of your coworkers and the men and women you served with, and kind of some of the impacts that had over the course of your career?
One of the things, cell phones were just starting to be populated, in 2001. And it seems like we've always had them, but like in my house, we had one cell phone, so the kids could call us, if we were out having dinner, they could get us, and I mean, I had a pager at work, right? And then if I got paged, I had to go find a payphone to call back and find out what's going on. And with that being said, junior Night Stalkers, for example. So I was a flight lead and I got my own hotel room, if you will, right? So one of the perks of the game. But when you're a junior pilot, you're sharing a room all the time, right? And there's no cell phones, so you can't walk out on the balcony and call your wife or text her. So you get to know the guys really well, and their families in particular. You know which kid's not doing his homework, which wife's fooling around, or the husband thinks she is, or, she thinks he is. And you end up having fights in front of your roommate, if you will, so you get to see what stress is going on in everybody's family. And that happened for, a couple of years there. And it's tough on them. I mean, it's hard to be away and you can't tell them where you are. And, in the early days of Enduring Freedom, we're at Bagram and there was no telephone, no internet. And my wife didn't know where I was. I mean, nobody knew officially where we were. They brought in the press and they told them they were in country X. They wouldn't tell them what country they were in, up in K2. And when they finally put in a phone, there was a line, 2-3 hours long, and you only could talk for 3 or 4 minutes, I guess, was the time limit. But I was so busy, I never got an opportunity. And some of the co-pilots who weren't part of the, because not only are you doing the planning, but it's the concept of the operation, how are we going to do stuff? And then once you figure all that out mathematically and what the ground force, then you bring in all the junior guys and they start crunching the numbers and double checking and triple checking everything. But in the meantime, they don't really have much to do. And so they can go stand in line. Well, the problem is their wife starts telling the other wives, oh, I talked to Bill, he's, doing great. Really? You've talked to him like 5 times this week. My husband hasn't called once. Yeah. And so we had to say, hey, listen, you're either going to stop making phone calls, like we'll put you off limits, or you got to tell your wife to shut up, because it's driving the other wives nuts. And so it's tough, just in that aspect. And, I talked, I think a little bit last time when I got shot down in March of 2002, I didn't tell my wife that I was okay, right? Like I had an opportunity before it hit CNN, which at the time actually had a big viewership. And the CIA guys at the FOB handed me an Iridium phone and said, hey, you should call your wife. This is about to hit the air. And I said, I can't, because the notification process has to happen. And I did not call, and it hit CNN. 2 Chinooks shot down, 8 people dead. Well, there's only 4 Chinooks there, as far as my wife knows. And we always operated in teams of 2. So it's half a chance that's me. And I haven't called, so it's probably me. And then so for like 3 or 4 days, she thought I was dead. And when I finally called home, she was pissed. And she never forgave me for that, ever.
Yeah.
Right. And every deployment I did from there on out, if things didn't go well or, she had some issues, it was always back to, well, you didn't call me last time, and that was a tough time.
Yeah. I feel like as humans, we always go to the worst place possible, emotionally, mentally, when something bad happens or when there's bad news. So the fear of the unknown is what drives that.
Right. And exactly. And, I just lost my train of thought there.
Understood. I understand completely, Alan. And that's what editing is all about. And that was priceless, Hatch. Holy shit.
That's blooper reel right there.
That was awesome.
That stays. How you feeling, Jimmy?
And the funny thing is, I used to be able to listen to 7 radios at the same time and still keep my train of thought. And just know from the tone of the radio who is talking. The fires net or the internal or the squadron, kind of thing.
Yep.
But now, I'm just talking and someone does something funny and I turn right off.
The screen went black.
I had to go, man. I had to go.
I thought there was an IT problem, and then I figured out what it was.
Yeah. You forgot to mute the mic.
No IT problem.
No, I wanted to share. That's
what it's
I'm
all
not here to
about.
hold back.
That's right. We
See the
invited
real
him
me.
on. That's right. We want the genuine Hatch.
This is what remember I told you, this is what it's like being in a hotel room with somebody.
There you go.
When we did assessments, right? We did selection. Yeah, I was usually one of the instructors that would evaluators. And, you can have a pilot who's good, right? He's got good stick, monkey skills, as I call it. We can teach a monkey to fly. And when they'd go around the room, the guy was in the room and the psych would say, what do you think, Al? And I'd say, I don't like this guy. They'd say, why not? And I said, because I don't think I could live in a tent with him for 6 months. And it's just, I couldn't put my finger on it. It's just, I knew that there was something about the guy, because you're going to be in close proximity. You're going to know your buddy's bowel habits. You're going to know when he's not eating right, when he's not sleeping right. And, you want somebody that's compatible with you to share those experiences with. So if you're going to, shit your pants by mistake, you want to be with guys that think it's funny and not, embarrassed. Like, oh crap! I thought that was funny. It's like, don't worry about it. I did it yesterday.
Yeah. I think the aviation community is well known for that. You've got to be good at the skills, but you also, like you said, you have to be somebody you want to have a beer with or spend time with. Jimmy, looking back on the course of your career, was that something you saw in your community as well, as far as selection process and stuff?
Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24 megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
I don't know. I mean, I guess so in selection. I mean, if somebody was just obnoxious and probably weren't going to get through there, although there's plenty of obnoxious people in the military, obviously. But, I wanted to go back a little bit to what Alan was talking about with the news and so my first deployment to Afghanistan was 2005. So when the Red Wings thing, it was the same kind of deal. A helicopter been shot down with, however many Navy SEALs on it. And my wife, we were in ABAT, I think, waiting to fly up. And when it hit the airwaves and, my wife saw it. And thank God I had a buddy who was home and he called her and said, "Hey man, Jimmy's not one of those guys." But she would never watch the news after that, ever. Yeah. Like she just wouldn't, she wanted nothing to do with it. So for like a day, she was, I don't think we can really, as guys and women who deploy in those things, I don't think we can truly understand the helplessness of that feeling. And I think it's something that obviously needs a little bit more attention. If we're going to be a successful military and deploy like we were deploying, I think that, I think they started getting it towards the end of my career, at least in the Navy world, they started getting it. They're like, you have to bring the families on board. You have to include them in things. You have to make it a family effort, a team effort, because it is either way. And if you choose not to include them, then they're on their own. So I think it got better, but I think it could definitely, that's something that should be considered.
Yeah, we started talking about it, and something made us lose our train of thought. But we're talking about how
I had to go, fellas. I mean, it was a big deal.
We're talking about how, as humans, when you hear bad news, your mind automatically goes to the worst place and the worst possible thing that could have happened. So I can envision, the scenario that Alan's describing, and his wife just automatically assuming that that's what had taken place. And communications changed a lot over the years, of course. I remember pagers and payphones. When I worked for the Forest Service, that's how we called home as well. And now you've got a cell phone. You could FaceTime. You can do all kinds of stuff, which is awesome. And hopefully that helps with that gap and lack of information. But Alan, can you expand a little bit on that, on the impact that had on your wife going forward throughout the rest of your deployments?
Obviously, there's the first return from that, coming home from her thinking I'm dead. And she was ice cold, for at least a month. And then, we kind of able to work through that. And then I redeployed again, in like July. So I was back in March. And so I had a little bit of time there, although that time in between deployments isn't all spent at home. You're out doing training. The only way you get good at, landing a little bird on some crappy part of a ship, or, a Black Hawk on the roof, of a building on the lip, or doing the same thing with a Chinook, is that you have to practice it, And so, as communications tools improve, cell phones, ended up getting more and more, and email, I was able to, maintain contact with my wife, and she did pretty good for a couple of years. And I'll tell you, the Red Wings put her right down the toilet emotionally, in that one of the enlisted guys on that aircraft was a good friend of ours. He actually worked for me. So I was the regiment standardization pilot, right? So I was like the chief pilot for the 47s, and Trey was the chief enlisted guy, non-rated crewman, or SI. And he was on the ramp when that RPG came up into the aft transmission. And she had already gone to a couple of memorials. And, any memorial, whether it's a military memorial, law enforcement, fire, it's very emotional. And, the families up front, they try to hold it together. But as soon as somebody starts crying out loud or wailing, it just, everybody in the room just, waterworks. Yeah. And, Linda just decided after Red Wings, she wouldn't go to any more memorials, because in this case, Trey was the one that she knew the best. He was a good family friend. And so the best that she knew. And so she wouldn't go anymore. And then anytime anybody got killed and they were doing a memorial and she wouldn't go, other wives would get mad. Why, what, are you too good to go to the memorial or something? She'd be like, no, you don't understand. I thought I lost my husband, and then I did lose, my friend. And it's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like law enforcement, maybe you guys can speak to the military community, has done a better job of including the spouses and families of folks in these communities, making mental health resources available. Have you seen that in the military communities?
I think it has. Now, after my wife died, I moved away to New York, and I wrote my book. And actually, I kind of cut ties. I mean, it wasn't intentional. I just didn't want to hear. The reason I left the compound was because FOMO, fear of missing out. Right? I did not want to be close enough to know that somebody had deployed. 10 aircraft just disappeared Saturday night, with the C-17s. Where did they go, right? And maybe I know, maybe I don't. But I didn't want to be part of that. If I couldn't be at the front of that formation, I didn't want to be there. And, getting away, I missed a chunk of evolution in the regiment, where, equipment improvements, training improvements, family support improvements, whether they hired a couple more psychologists or, included the families. I kind of missed out on that until that movie 12 Strong came out, and the regiment supported that. And that's when I kind of, I was invited to the premiere, and that's where I, kind of connected again with the guys, and it was good. I missed that, Jimmy, you probably have the same thing, right? I mean, the guys, people ask me all the time, do you miss flying? And I say, no, I miss the people, I really miss the people, and the attitude and the sense of humor and the, poking at each other, it's just, it's a good group of guys.
I just got a message that says, Jimmy ran out of storage. Recording has stopped.
It's funny. So I was thinking, Jimmy just graduated Yale, right? He went back to school, did Yale. I went back to school and graduated like SUNY Empire, the kid in New York school.
There he is.
Wait, you guys are laughing. Were you guys talking shit while I was gone? All right. Well,
we were talking about how you went back to school to Yale to get your degree, and I went to SUNY New York, SUNY Empire. It's not quite the same quality.
Yeah, the story about me getting into Yale is pretty funny. I didn't think I had, and I probably didn't have any business here. But it's really interesting. Yale has, the year I came was 2019, there were 13 non-traditional students admitted, 7 of whom were veterans. This year they admitted 20.
Wow.
And I just got a part-time gig helping admissions find, learn how to talk to the military community so we can get people who, like me, didn't go to college. They like veterans here. And
that's cool.
Yeah, it is. But, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Al, if it makes you feel any better, SUNY has 4 letters. Yale has 4 letters. I'm just trying to be positive here.
Yeah, so we went to schools that are sort of the same, but not really. I mean, Yale.
Let me tell you something, truly, and this is in the book, but not one day in my life, never, before I got in the military, when I was at my prime, did I have the academic chops to be here, really. And what I do have is trips around the sun doing crazy shit, and that is value added. The people who run this place want everybody they can get in here to mix it up, and it's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah.
I used to have a lot of harsh words about things like diversity, and I thought it was kind of bullshit. But diversity in its truest sense isn't about race or religion or anything like that or sex. It's about thinking and culture and society, and working things out takes a lot of different angles. Just like in combat, taking care of a mission, you got to approach it from a lot of different ways. And I think that's just how I frame things. I spent so much time in the military that I look at things as a mission. At least class, I look at it as a mission, and we're gonna have an after action at the end of every class. We're gonna go through the steps, and we're gonna talk about it. Did we have a definition of success? Did we get there? That's unfortunately in the real world, man. Just nobody does that. So there's all this hazy gray, which the world is gray. It's not black and white. But man, you could definitely give it a little bit better effort. And you know what? They do that here. They give a shit. It is pretty impressive.
Well, before we transition this next part of the conversation, it's going to be more like a panel style conversation. I just wanted to circle back and talk about your books briefly. Both your books, probably the 2 best books that I've read when it comes to leadership, mental health from the communities.
Shameless plug.
That, for those that can't see, Al's raising his book. Amazing books. But from those books, a lot of surprising stories have come about. Some of those of which we've heard, and Jack will share a really interesting story as we go. But from those stories, what are some of the interesting things that have come back to your ears that you've heard that have impacted in ways that it's impacted the readers that have read your stories?
Well, for me, I get a lot of emails from people who have had similar life circumstances with loved ones with addictions, and how they did handle it or didn't handle it, or the, trying to hide it. I tried for a long time to hide it, and in some areas I was successful, and others I wasn't. I mean, there were people that didn't have a clue, and I'm like, wow, how did I manage to hide it from them? And others, it was, so obvious that, they told me years later, they'd be saying, oh yeah, I knew this and that. And I was like, wow, I thought I was hiding that pretty good. But anyway, I've had people write to me and say, hey, thanks for telling us about that, because I've been going through it for years, thought I was alone. Right. And that's one of those things, whether it's, a loved one's addictions or, your own problems, with the PTSD or emotions or, any kind of fears, letting other people know that is probably not a bad thing. At least that's what I've found so far.
Well, it's interesting. I feel like substance abuse and mental health kind of work hand in hand, right? I think you start seeing a little more of the substance abuse taking place when mentally things aren't where they should be, right? You're just kind of trying to dull some of that or bury some of that. I don't know if Jamie, if you have any insight or some words of wisdom when it comes to that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have any words of wisdom. I'll tell you, I had this really wrong attitude for it. But let me first. So the responses that I have had to the book that have been amazing are essentially the same as Alan's. Like, your vulnerability has helped me. Like, if they get a guy who comes from where I come from, stand up in front of people and say, man, look, I struggled and I couldn't figure out how to unfuck my life, and I needed help. And then my buddies helped me. And, one of the issues that I talk about a lot is, people say, oh, we need more resources. We need more resources. Maybe. But what we really need is what happened with me. Like, and I use I'll grab something like a book and then, a piece of string or something. But essentially what I do is I say, look, here's the resources. And here I am. And this right here is the river of shame. I don't want anybody to know I need those resources. I ain't going to get those resources. They were there the whole time. But I was like not having it. And I'm not going to let anybody know I need it. So my buddies grabbed me by the hand, kind of pulled me across the river, right? So, that thing in and of itself is looking out for each other. And, we do that in the military and law enforcement as well. And I talk to law enforcement about this all the time. But if you're not firing on all cylinders in your head, the whole team, that can be a problem, especially in the line of work that you're in, like where in aviation, it's not forgiving, right? So all of the things that take away from you firing on all cylinders should be addressed. So we, like, for example, fitness, physical fitness, well, what about this? Like, this is just as important as any physical fitness. And how do you deal? Like, we don't even talk about it. Like, well, we did. I think we do now. So when the first thing that I think by and large, regardless of how you get there, when you're struggling, the first thing to do is know that that you're not special, that it's not, you're not all fucked up. Like if you went through even half of these things and you weren't a little bit messed up, something would really be wrong with you then. It's okay, right? It's the human condition, which leads me to the next part of this. I kept thinking, man, I'm going to find this modality, whatever it is. Plant medicine was particularly strong for me. It was very, very helpful. I'd still go see therapists, EMDR, all of the different mental health modalities can help you. But the bottom line is you're a human and you're never going to be cured of that. You're always going to be able to be depressed. There's always going to be the opportunity for things to go sideways in your life, you to make a freak decision and bang, something gets banged up, you get hurt, someone in your family gets hurt. You're never going to escape that. So drinking the magic potion or taking the magic pill will help for a little bit, but until you understand that it's a day-to-day discipline of taking care of yourself and thinking about things in the way that will allow you to use the tools you've been given to deal with things that you can't control, until you get to that point, everything else is just a magic potion. And I've definitely lived that life. Oh, I went and did the magnetic. That saved everything. And then 2 weeks later, I'm down the pipe again. So I think, look, and I'm 57, so hopefully someday I get my shit together. But until you come to the conclusion or the realization that, you have to work on yourself every single day, and it's not selfish. It's what you should be doing because you're more useful. You can serve people better if you're taking care of yourself. If you're all fucked up, you're not going to be much help. The other thing I think that was for me, and I've gotten to where I can talk about this stuff in front of people now, but being messed up was kind of my identity after my identity of being a tough guy in Navy SEAL. Oh, he's struggling. That was like who I was. People showed me that they cared for me that way. And that was important to me. I needed that, right? Like I was insecure about who I was or didn't know who I was. But I'm this guy who's hurting and messed up, and everybody treats me with, a certain deference because of that. And that's also counterproductive at some point. If you're genuinely messed up and you're figuring things out, then clearly, right? But it goes to a point, and then it's like, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing, right? And so I see that actually with a lot of the young veterans here, kids who just got out of the service and show up here, and it's a big difference. And I don't think they realize how much control they have over their life experiences, right? So in the military, nobody gives a shit what you think, really. I mean, especially when you're junior, like, shut up and do your job. Right? And so that's kind of what these young people are used to. They get here and they're like, shut up and do your job, but you don't really know what your job is except to go to class. And you don't really understand this environment where they've got kids ripping the flag down during a demonstration and people talking shit about the United States because they come from a different place. They're not bad people. They're not bad Americans. They just have a different perspective. Man, guys can turn sideways quickly and just abandon all hope. Whereas, hey, it's all of it here anyway. But you have to do the work. And, I've been lazy. I didn't want to do the work. And you pay for that, You pay for it. I wish I could have had the discipline I had with some of the things I did in the SEAL teams with my mental health. But I did similarly to what I did in the SEAL teams. I just keep bouncing off things until I run into what's right. And that's painful and it's slow, but it works. Right. And I think sometimes people tell me, hey, man, well, at least if you can do it. I'm like, yeah, I'm the lowest common denominator, so get out.
Alan, something pops into my head in listening to you talking after reading your book. How did you deal with staying focused, staying really sharp, knowing what was going on at home? I mean, that flying that Chinook and the way you did and the environment you did, that takes 100% concentration, 100% skill and all that. But yet in the back of your head, you knew that things were not good at home and very serious at times. What techniques did you use, or what did you do to deal with that yourself to stay in the game?
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned air medical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completions Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs, including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors. Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24-megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking. Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
Celebrating the 4th anniversary of the Hangar Z Podcast. We're thrilled to announce that the Hangar Z Podcast has reached a significant milestone. 4 remarkable years of bringing you the best conversations surrounding public safety aviation. To our fantastic listeners, guests, and supporters, you guys rock. Seriously, without you, we'd just be a bunch of helicopter geeks talking to ourselves. Not that we don't do that anyways. Over the last 4 years, and especially since joining forces with MHM Publishing, the Hangar Z Podcast has evolved into a premier platform for sharing insightful discussions. From pilots and mechanics to doctors and leaders, our community is growing stronger and more connected with each episode. As we reflect on this journey, we're filled with gratitude for the countless moments of learning, laughter, and shared experiences. From in-depth interviews to live event coverage, we've covered a wide range of topics that matter to our community. Here's to many more years. We look forward to continuing to bring you top-notch content, special guests, and stories from the front lines of public safety aviation. Thank you for making the Hangar Z Podcast your trusted source for all things public safety aviation. Cheers.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts.